Hi, I'm Marc Dresner, and this is Partnerships TV, coming to you from the 20th Annual Partnerships in Clinical Trials Conference in Phoenix, Arizona, 2011. Joining us today is Tomasz Sablinski. He's the Managing Director of Celtic Therapeutics. Tomasz, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
When we spoke earlier, let's dive right into it. You mentioned that you felt some new models were needed for clinical trials. Why do you feel this way? Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure, and that's not only my feeling. I think it's widespread sentiment across the industry that current model is, some people like to say broken, some people say unsustainable, but there is a problem. And it is a problem that affects the back end of development and bringing medicines to patients, because if you are inefficient in testing them in clinical trials, then of course this becomes a narrow strait through which not many flow. And I don't think there is much of a problem in how drugs are sold, distributed, and that's not the topic here. I don't think, contrary to many, that there is a problem with discovery. I think basic research scientists do a very decent job actually identifying new molecules, new targets. The problem is that because it's so expensive and so inefficient to get them through clinical stages, you have a problem at the back end, which of course creates a crisis for pharma as an industry. So that's in a nutshell why we need more efficient and more streamlined models for clinical development.
You also mentioned when we spoke earlier that there's a lot of redundancy going on out there, questions that have already been asked and already answered are being answered again. Is that also part of the problem?
Oh yeah, sure. If you, I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah.
Any industry, if you spend money on something that's already known, and you create an experiment to which the answer is already somewhere to be found, you add to the inefficiency. And again, this is not my own notion. It's FDA recognizes that, big pharma recognizes that. They're trying to do something about it, but it's not working quite well yet.
Yet being the key word.
Yes.
Let's talk about solutions.
Well, I think first of all, you have to look where this drug development sphere is today vis-a-vis 10, 15 years ago. And it's about 5 times more complicated. It costs about 5 to 10 times more, and the productivity goes way down. So fundamentally, you have to look what changed from 5, 10, 15 years ago that makes all these three things such a trouble. And I think first is you have to go back to simplicity. You have to ask when you're designing the experiment, and clinical trial is an experiment, what is that you really want to know, and which obviously affects tremendously your endpoints, affects number of data points that you have to collect. And if you go up and up and up, it increases complexity, time, cost. So back to simplicity is one clear solution in my mind. Difficult because so many players that affect design of a clinical trial in big pharma. It's not only basic researchers who want to know more and sometimes treat patients like experimental rodents. We can do whatever, you can't. You have marketing guys who have a lot of influence over what is being done, which of course also create complexity. And there is something to say about regulators who are not necessarily striving for simplicity, what they want to know. Yes.
For that matter, yeah. So you basically have a committee, designing a horse and ending up with a camel, if you will.
Well, you can use that parallel, yes.
Yeah. And how about the idea of designing trials to provide answers versus perhaps hiding outcomes?
Well, this is a touchy issue, I guess.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not going to make friends with my marketing colleagues, who I think are doing excellent job marketing approved medications and making sure that right messages are being sold to patients in a sense, but they're not so good in helping design of clinical trials. So, of course, if I'm marketing anything, I want my baby to look better. And therefore, the baby is as good as your efficacy, and it's not as good when it has side effects. So the benefit-risk ratio, which is not an exact science, is something that people designing clinical trials, in particular phase 2B and 3, look at. And since you have a lot of influence how the scientific experiment is designed, you are trying to give it best shot for your baby, meaning you're trying to measure less of those things that may affect the safety and as much as possible to elevate efficacy. And that's what I call trials that are not really looking for hard answers, because hard answers sometimes simply, the truth is very, very painful. You gotta stop. And sometimes it's a stop at a point where you've already invested a couple of $100 million or more. So it continues, and then hard realization the trial was designed to hide comes when it's uncovered what was hidden on the market. Avandia is a classic example, and there are others. And I'm not suggesting that any one person did it, unethically. It's just the whole concept of committee that tries the baby to make the baby look better than it really is. Yeah, natural, absolutely natural tendency.
Yeah. Modern information technology. You feel that this needs to help drive clinical development, not merely as an app.
I think I'm on the radical side here, and again, will not make friends with my development colleagues. I think that I recently came across a statement from a very prominent CEO of pharma who said, well, in 5 years, I want the IT person to be at the table as a strategic thinker with us. I think it's 5 years too late already. So if he's trying to do it in 5 years, then of course I hope he'll not be the CEO, and perhaps his company will not exist, because I believe that you have an information technology, not one industry, but information technology as a concept made fundamental impact of how we live and fundamental impact on all sectors of the industry. Pharma is still, I call it, refusing to acknowledge that cell phones exist. And there is still predominantly paper-based, fax machine-based industry. I'm talking about clinical development. It's astonishing, and it's just so incredibly inefficient. And if I had all the money in the world, if I were building a pharmaceutical company from the scratch, I would first hire people who were successful technology adopters and implementers. That's what you need. And into it, you pack the content of drug development. Everything is easier. Logistics, data collection, transparency of interactions. It's mind-boggling how far back this industry is vis-a-vis others. And by the way, just one thing that we have to acknowledge, it's not entirely fault of pharma companies or biotech companies. Healthcare in general is also very technically disadvantaged, if you will, or disabled, because there are still physicians who don't use internet to communicate with patients.
Right. Or who are adamantly opposed to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the whole context, not only pharma.
When you're talking about technology, let's talk a little bit about telehealth, telemedicine, where that fits into all of this.
Well, I think if you look at the growth of telehealth or telemedicine, it's the fastest growing sector in delivery of healthcare, because people figured, and of course people who deal with money figured, that it's much cheaper if you're a patient and you don't absolutely need to be in the hospital.
Yes.
If I move you to home and surround you with expensive gizmos and wirelessly transmit data from you to a healthcare provider, it's still cheaper than keeping you in a hospital, because technology is so cheap these days. Yeah. So that's growing faster and faster. Now show me one trial in 2011 that was done monitoring patients from home, where thousands and hundreds of thousands of patients are monitored from home. They're being not only monitored, but they're being There are interventions done remotely.
Yeah.
There are surgeries done by surgeons residing in one place in the world, remotely by robots in the military on the battlefield. And clinical research still refuses that cell phones exist. So there is a gap.
Yeah.
There is also tremendous opportunity, of course, because of that.
You mentioned radical change. Are the current players in this space, pharmas, CROs, biotechs, are they prepared for radical game change in clinical development?
I think there are two answers to it. There are individuals within these organizations who clearly recognize that this is the industry in need of intensive care, not psychotherapy, because this is a patient that is close to expiring. Will this individual be able to transform the industry quick enough to for remaining players to be still a major forces in the space? I'm hesitant to give a resounding yes. And as always in transformational change, there will be some who will survive, but many will not. I think that's where we are. And by this space, I mean big pharma or big pharma's development or clinical development units, and some of them are almost gone. Some CROs who right now actually are picking up the stuff from big pharmas and they're enjoying it, but it's not innovative enough too. So I think within the next 2 to 3 years, we will see who is on the right track.
Who do you think, what models, if you had to just give me what models, what players will prevail based on the scenarios that you're sort of setting?
Well, I think in a sense, I said that already in my dream scenario. I think when people who know how to deal with information technology efficiently and know how to make money by efficient movement of data, large volumes of data, collecting them, which is what clinical trials are, in fact.
Yes.
You will create a winner. So I don't need to name names because they're obvious. Google's, Oracle, IBM, and they all, if you observe this industry, they're all moving into the space, not necessarily to clinical trials yet, but to healthcare services.
Yes.
It's going to be a snap before they see how much is to gain in clinical development, clinical trials. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 or 3 years we'll be seeing a merger of major CRO with one of those, or acquisition. I think that's where we're going, because IT will drive the change.
Well, I think that's a pretty dramatic prediction, and I want to thank you very much for giving us something to think about. I think you're probably dead on there.
My pleasure. And of course, there is also a space for small players to enter and make disruptive innovations.
Sure.
But that's perhaps something we can talk about next year.
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure. Tomasz, thank you very much
for
joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. That'll conclude this episode of Partnerships TV. Please stay tuned for our next episode. I'm Marc Dresner, signing off from Partnerships in Clinical Trials 2011.